get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Payam Zamani of OnePlanetGroup.com. Also, you can check out his book at CrossingTheDesertBook.com. And Payam, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Since, Payam has an amazing journey, career in a lot of respects. So growing companies. One that sticks out is I had Sujin Patel, who started Mailshake and grew it, I think, to over 70,000 users. And he talked about how he's acquiring business, SaaS companies along the way. That was an interesting one. John Warlow, he wrote Built to Sell. He's got the Built to Sell podcast. Payam was actually on John Warlow's podcast, a great episode. So I encourage people to check that one out. Payam's journey is kind of similar to Dame Stephanie Shirley, Payam, on the podcast. She wrote the book Let It Go, and she documented her life starting. She was an unaccompanied child refugee at age 5, where her parents wanted to protect her from the Holocaust. So they put her on a train at age 5 to go to strangers at the end. Crazy. She started one of UK's first software companies, startups in 96. They went on the London Stock Exchange, and I think they employed 8,500 people. She gave away 67 million pounds of her personal wealth to different projects. I know that's Payam all about that. Steve Sarowitz was a good episode. I know you know Steve as well. Of course. Talking about combining religion, business, and philanthropy, and he started Velocity with 3 people in a 600 square foot office, turned it into $1 billion company. So check those out. And there's also a good conversation, I think, on the internet with Payam and Steve out there somewhere. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. Payam, we call ourselves the magic elves that run in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company so they can create amazing relationships and great content, and most importantly, run their business. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships, and I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire on this planet and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at rise25.com. I am really excited about today's interview, and everyone should check out Crossing the Desert, the book, and we're going to talk about it in a second. But Payam Zamani is an entrepreneur, investor, the founder of One Planet Group. He's the author, as I mentioned, of Crossing the Desert, which is the power of embracing life's difficult journeys. And Payam was actually born in Iran and was forced to flee at age 16 due to his religious beliefs. And he and his brother eventually founded AutoWeb, one of the first online car marketplaces, and they took it public in 1999. Now, he's built and currently owns multiple technology and media businesses. They've invested in over 50 companies, but it wasn't always like that, okay? 10 years after arriving in the US, this was as teenage refugees. So picture yourself at 16, they have $75, right, between the two of them, and they create a company that IPOs called AutoWeb. Amazing story. Right now, he's on a mission. They have One Planet Group, which is a people-first culture, and they own multiple companies under the One Planet Group. Payam, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Glad to be here.
I want to start with that. It's a really crazy, crazy story, and that's why people should check out Crossing the Desert to get the full story. But your mother thought you were better off with smugglers.
Yes. So, I talk about it in my book that growing up in Iran as a Baha'i, being my religion, was no walk in the park. And particularly if you did not live in Tehran, the big city. And so waking up every morning and getting our windows broken was pretty common, or getting beaten up in school, getting kicked out of school, which I was ultimately at the age of 11 expelled from school. And then it was in 1987 that my parents decided that, look, you're better off leaving us than staying here. So they paid smugglers to get me out of the country, which makes you wonder how good law-abiding people find a smuggler to get you out of the country. And there's this moment in my life that will always be etched in my memory. And usually I have a hard time talking about it without getting emotional, but it's the moment that my mom had to let me go, which is a moment that after her and I were on a bus ride for 24 hours to get to this border town in Iran called Zahedan. And the smugglers had asked me to get off the bus, not say goodbye to my mom, because people go to that town often to leave the country illegally. So don't make a scene, get off the bus, go to the side of the road, somebody will pick you up. And I do that. And this car stopped by and says, get in. I get in, the car speeds away. And I just look back through the rear window of the car, and I see my mom. And, I feel like our eyes are locked, but, through the glare of the window, she probably cannot see me. And all I can think is she's crying out loud inside, but there's nothing she can do. And this is the right path, but it's an unfortunate path. We didn't think we're going to ever see each other again. But, luckily we were able to. She passed away 7 years ago. But, it's one of those moments that, and of course the journey ahead, frankly, was a journey that there was better than 10% chance that I would not survive it. So, it's a tough path forward. But then again, a country, imagine, has done so much to a minority group that a mother feels like this is a safer path.
Hearing that story, I'm scared. Okay. But what are you feeling in that moment where they basically just say, car comes up, get in?
Well, I mean, you have all watched the news from the Middle East, and I feel like it's weird to say this, but living in that part of the world, life is cheap. That's unfortunate, but life is cheap. And I think that I've always wondered, when you are a soldier in the trenches during a major war, are you ready to die? And I feel like having lived in the Middle East and having been in some of those difficult situations, I feel like you are kind of accepting your destiny if that turns out to be the destiny. So there are moments, I talk in my book about 2 moments in my life, 2 experiences that I thought there's a good chance I'm not going to get out of it alive. And in both of those situations, I was content.
I don't know if one of them was this one, but there was a point when you're in school.
Yeah.
And the teacher, it wasn't a student, the teacher kind of invoked violence. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah. So after Iran's revolution, and for those who don't know, in 1979, until then, we had a king in Iran. And then in 1979, the clerics, the Muslim clerics, fundamentalists, they took over. And they made life very difficult for minorities, particularly Baha'is. And every school in Iran had this teacher that his job was to make sure that every student would turn out to be a good Muslim, whether they're Muslim or not. And this teacher would walk around with a gun. That was his way of ensuring that people would turn out to be good Muslims. And he would invite me and this other Baha'i boy to join them for mass prayers every day on campus. And we politely say that, well, we're Baha'is, we have our own prayers. And frankly, he was pretty cordial. And he would say, okay, I get it, that's fine. One day during his sermon, which we could hear from the classroom that we were waiting in, that he said, today we're going to get rid of these unclean infidels. You got to keep in mind, based on the Islamic beliefs, the way the fundamentalists believe, there are a few things that are unclean, whether you wash them or whatever you do with them. It is infidels, Baha'is being the prime ones, dogs, pig, and ejaculate. those four things are unclean and you cannot touch. And so he said, today we're going to get rid of the infidels, the two Baha'i boys. The school ended. There's a mob outside waiting for us. Of course, no teacher is willing to give us a ride because they would be, putting their own lives at risk. And, after about 10 minutes, the two of us, we looked at each other. We thought, well, either they're going to come to us or we're going to go to them. And these are kids standing there with rocks and sticks and whatever. So we went forward, and I call this the bleeding mile. There was a mile of walk. They started beating us, throwing rocks at us, stoning us, and frankly, and spitting on us. Frankly, I did not think I'm going to survive that. There was a time that I was almost in a different kind of a zone. I could not feel the pain any longer, but I was just looking across the street. I was not showing emotions. I was not angry. I was not crying, but I was just thinking that their parents across the street walking, they cannot care less about that this mob is killing two Baha'i boys. What has happened to these people? How did they become like this? And I was feeling sorry for them, that this is what has happened to them. I survived the ordeal. When I got home, I was drenched head to toe. You could wring out my clothes and spit would come out of them. And but that was it. I could not live with my parents anymore. I was at night. I was sent out of town, and I never went back. And there's of course a lot more associated with that story and what happened next. How my parents tried to go to the school district and so on, and how they were threatened to death. That is life living under a fundamentalist regime. So anyhow, I tell people, these days we're seeing what's happening on campuses in the US, and I feel deeply for the innocents that are getting affected. But I tell people, peel the onion though, peel the onion, because there's a lot more there. You got to wonder, did Hamas care about their own people and about the people of Israel? Who is funding them? Iran is. Iran is a country made of Shiites. 9% of Iranians are Sunnis. You cannot find a Sunni mosque in Iran. They demolished them all. Since when Iran cares about Sunnis, that they care about Palestinians? This is a political thing that Iran is definitely behind. And I feel sad that the Palestinians have become the pawn in the middle. But Iranians have done a lot of bad things in the world. The Iranian government has, the Islamic Republic of Iran has.
How did your family become that religion? Because it's not as common there, right?
No.
How did they become Baha'i?
So my mom was born in a Baha'i family. At least when she was born, her parents were Baha'is, even though her mom had become a Baha'i after she had married my grandfather. And my grandfather, they go back. They were one of the early Baha'is. And my Baha'i faith is only about 150 years old. So there are many early Baha'is that we've all been in touch with. And my dad, though, he was born in a Islamic fundamentalist family, and to the point that Baha'is were very much about modern education, educating everybody, the girls in particular. So their reputation in Iran was something that was very known. So my grandfather, from my dad's side, my dad's father, would not let my dad to go to school. He would say, if you go to school, you'll become a Baha'i. All you need to know is how to read Quran. That's all you need. And my dad, when he was 11 years old, he actually escaped home, because I talked about this in my book. My grandfather was a violent man who killed one of his sons.
Wow.
And so my dad escaped home, and ultimately ended up in a juvenile house. And but at the age of 20, he became familiar with the Baha'i faith as a result of a Muslim cleric saying bad things about Baha'is. And he felt that, I want to get to know these people. And then as a result of that, he got to know it and decided that, this makes a lot of sense. It basically says that, religion is a progressive revelation. It's not or. The fact that, we are all part of one human family, that women and men are equal, that science and religion should agree. If they don't, it's religion that's at fault because it's dogmas and superstition. He's like, this is all making sense. So he decided to become a Baha'i. So then he met my mom after he had become a Baha'i. So I was born in a Baha'i family as a result.
It's a crazy journey. I would love for you just to kind of fast forward a little bit through, take us a little bit through that journey. Once you get in the car, you said you're 24 hours with your mom. They drop you off. Someone, random person picks you up. What does the journey look like to get to the US at this point?
So the smuggling part took about a week for me to make it to the first town in Pakistan. And keep in mind, I mean, that whole area of the world is an area you want to stay away from. This is where Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan meet. It is one of the most lawless places on the planet. Some of the worst things on the planet happen. The smugglers take drugs to Iran as the route to wherever they want to take it. And they usually go back empty handed unless they have people to take with them. It is a rough place to be. So I just remember when I was going through that, the whole time I was thinking roadkill, that if I die here, nobody will know. Nobody will know what happened. Because keep in mind, when you're being smuggled, the border patrol will not stop you. They will simply use rocket propelled grenade and they hit the convoy, they hit the people. They will be afraid for their own lives. So they're not going to stop you. And if they were to arrest you, the sentence you would get back in Iran would be death. So either way, it would have been a pretty miserable outcome. So after a week, the experience was kind of like the setting. Think of the movie Lawrence of Arabia. That's the setting. That's what the landscape looks like. I make it to that border town, and I went to the United Nations outpost. Now, luckily, as Baha'is, we have Baha'is all over the planet. So when I got to that town, from the place that they dropped us off, we were able to contact the Baha'is of that town who came to us and in that motel. And they took us to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, that they had an outpost in that town. They got us temporary asylum papers. Then they gave us Pakistani clothing. So, we would blend in. And they sent us to Lahore, which is on the other side of Pakistan. My brother and sister had left a year prior to me, and they were in that town. So I was able to reunite with them. But then ultimately, I made my way to the US Embassy in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan. And, not today because I've been talking about this quite a bit, but I usually get emotional talking about this, that I went to the US Embassy in Pakistan. And that is the first time in my life that I experienced human rights. I love this country. And one of the reasons is that it gives hope to the planet. Most Americans don't realize that. If you're a teenager living a miserable life in miserable conditions, halfway around the world, you don't hope that Russia is going to save you or China is going to save you. You hope that the US will save you. That's a spiritual destiny that this country has. That is a privilege that we have, and we don't realize it. So I went to the US Embassy, and the US, being the amazing country that it is, it hired a lawyer to fight on my behalf to get me admittance to the US, basically prove my case. And Ronald Reagan was very much aware of what was going on to Baha'is in Iran at the time. And as long as you could prove that you are Baha'i, you would get accepted to come to this country, as you would get accepted to go to Australia, to Germany, to many other countries. And so I was able to gain admittance, and a Catholic charity from New York bought my ticket. And I came to the US and landed here on June 20th, 1988 with my brother in San Francisco. And I talk about this, $75 in our pocket between the two of us.
I know you have, I think you have a film company. Forget about the other stuff you're making. This, are you going to come out with the Crossing the Desert film?
I'm not going to make a movie about
No,
myself.
someone else will do it though.
If somebody wants to do it, maybe Steve
Yeah.
Sarowitz. You know, Steve, he owns Wayfarer. So
Exactly. Steve, if you're listening, I have your next movie. It's called
it's,
Crossing the Desert. There's a book.
exactly.
You should buy it and make a movie out of it.
That's right.
Your entrepreneurial journey. Talk about Monopoly. It kind of, I think it started your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. So, in must have been 1978, my mom's sister was dying from cancer in Tehran, and we lived in another town, northern part of Iran. And I was sad that my mom was leaving, and she said that, okay, fine, I'll get you something when I come back in a few days. What do you want? I said, I want a Monopoly set. She had no idea what I'm talking about. I don't even know how I heard about Monopoly. Um, she remembered. She brought me back a Monopoly, and it was the real one, but it was an Iranian version. It had the streets of Tehran, and so it was anyway. It was a great set, and I remember that I would just take care of it as good as I could to make sure that it will last. But from early on, I had this love about entrepreneurship, and I started a bunch of small businesses, all kinds of stuff. I'm selling stuff on the side of the road to um, even selling software. Back when you could copy software on cassette tapes, and in Iran, copyright laws are not really followed much. So I was making money from doing that. But then when we came to the US, my brother and I, and that love that we had for entrepreneurship continued. And then, I just feel like, life moments happen to all of us. Sometimes we take advantage of them, sometimes we don't. But it was a life moment that in 1994, my brother and I, we decided to start an online car buying service, which it was something that we did out of passion. And I always tell people the companies that got started in the early 90s on the web, they all came out of passion. No one thought they're going to become millionaires as a result of starting those. And I loved cars. I was 24 years old and or 23 years old, and I had owned 16 different cars up to that point, cheap cars, Pinto and, old Datsuns and old Camaros and so on. But I felt like it could be really helpful to arm the consumer with a lot of information about cars, and help them make a wiser decision. And the internet gave us the platform.
You have $75 when you get here.
Yes.
How did you make ends meet? I mean, we'll get to the, AutoWeb, which is an amazing story, but like, I guess, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, like we take things for granted, right? And so
Yeah.
I want just to put myself in someone who's 16. They've already taken this crazy journey to the US. They have $75. There's no like place to live in, food. You're not going to a school. You're not going to work. How did you make ends meet in the beginning to just survive, I guess?
Yeah. I had a cousin who lived in California, and he was the one who showed up at the airport to pick us up. The cousin was 4.5 years older than me, and he picked us up, and he lived in Modesto, California. For those of you who don't know, Modesto doesn't exactly remind you of what the US looks like in the movies. It's nothing like New York or San Francisco or LA. It's in the middle of the farm country, Central Valley. So anyway, he took us to Modesto, and we lived with him for 20 days. And after 20 days, within the 20 days, I mean, the first night I slept for 16 hours, jet lag and all that. But then the next day, he took us out looking for jobs. And I got a job at a silk screen printing shop in the evening, and during the day working at a pizza place where he was a manager at. My brother got a job. 20 days later, we put down $300 security deposit and $350 a month rent. My brother and I got a one-bedroom apartment, and we spent about $80 buying furniture from garage sales. And that was it. We started working, and I went to high school. But I would work every night on the weekends. So I worked 40 hours a week, even when I went to high school. And we had to make ends meet. There was no other way around it. And we loved it. We loved it because even though we were busy, very busy, going to school and working, we felt free. We felt that we had the opportunity to live a free life without being afraid. I mean, it's hard to fathom the idea of living a Baha'i life in Iran. Even if you're not a Baha'i, I mean, you've seen the woman life freedom movement, that how everybody is constantly living in danger. Now multiply that by 10, that's a Baha'i life in Iran. And so not having to deal with that was phenomenal.
It's wild. Talk about the beginnings of AutoWeb and the
Mm,
initial idea.
yeah. So my brother is 6 years older than me, but we uh, both went to college at the same time. So we graduated the same year, 1994. And out of college, he got a job at Microsoft. So one day he called me up. He said, "Look, Payam, I'm looking to buy a Honda. Honda does not have a website. What do you think about starting a website for cars?" And my first question was, "I don't know what the internet looks like." And he said, "Okay, I'll come over." He came over. He set me up on CompuServe. Of course, 90% of people are watching this have no idea what I'm talking
I
about.
had CompuServe account. I had a CompuServe
Very
account. Yeah.
so it was basic.
CS.com. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was how there was AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy, and those would give you access to the internet. And I think there were only about 5,000 websites registered at the time. And so I saw the internet, I experienced it, and I loved it. And I thought that would be a great idea. So then he became the technology guy, and I became the sales and marketing guy. And we hit the road, and I was just on the road trying to sell. And I remember there was a time I had 150 business cards that I had accumulated from every presentation I had done to every car dealer in the US, and they had all said no. And my brother was asking me that, should we stop? I'm like, no,
What was your
we
pitch
should
like?
not.
What would you go in and tell them?
I would say that, would you like to join AutoWeb, the nation's electronic auto mall? And they're like, "Well, what is it? What does it look like?" And I would take out my computer and I would show them, and I would tell them that basically, you know, it's the internet being this new thing. When people go online to buy cars, well, where do they go? It's the web. They go to AutoWeb. So let me show you what it looks like. And people loved it. We would basically give them a microsite within AutoWeb, and that was it. And they would pay us a flat monthly fee or annual fee, and they would become part of the program. And we, of course, evolved that model dramatically over the years to come. But that was the beginning of it. And the first 150 said no, but those were the days that I would listen to Wayne Dyer, Zig Ziglar, Tony Robbins every single day and pump myself up. I would listen to Guns N' Roses before going to the first meeting to get energetic, and I would show up, just on fire, wanting to sell, and they would say no. But then, finally, once the first deal got done, then the floodgates opened. So you fast forward to 4 years later, we had 5,000 member dealers.
I used to listen to those same tape cassettes.
Yeah.
The Zig Ziglar, yeah, all those. So there's the first milestone of getting the first dealer to say yes, and then it just created more dealers to say yes, obviously. What was another major milestone? I do want to talk about, not only were you going to dealerships, but you started going to the car insurance companies too.
Yeah.
And I don't know at what point the conversation with State Farm comes into play, but what when you're going basically dealer to dealer, what was a major milestone for you in the progress?
I mean, there are a few major milestones. One was raising money. We had no idea how to raise money in the US. I mean, we raised $150,000 initially at a super low valuation. But you got to keep in mind, my brother and I did not fit the mold. We had thick accent. We had just come to the US. We did not go to an Ivy League. My brother went to Chico State. I went to UC Davis. And we were not white. And Silicon Valley, at least today only 2% of the money goes to women. back then, I would say a very small percentage went to anyone that did not fit the mold. So we had to go to Fort Lee, New Jersey to raise money at a fraction of the valuation that companies like ours would raise money in Silicon Valley. But we didn't know the difference, and it was just fine for us. So raising money was a milestone. The other one was we were inventing performance-based marketing. We're inventing lead generation, locally targeted marketing. And so when we came up with the idea of dealers paying not a subscription fee, but a cost per lead fee, that was a game changer. So as a dealer, you didn't have to risk much. You would just pay us for every customer who had raised his hand and said, I want to buy a Honda Accord. All right, well, it's your job to sell it, but only pay us if you receive somebody who says, I'm interested in a Honda Accord. And then, of course, building this into a true complete service. So State Farm Insurance was a big milestone because of the fact that we had an opportunity to monetize the consumers we already had. Somebody wants to buy a Honda Accord. Well, they want to know how much it will cost to insure that Honda. Allstate had no interest. Progressive had no interest. State Farm, somebody returned my phone call. So for a few months, I would literally every month fly to Bloomington, Illinois, and the middle of cornfields of
Not too
Illinois.
far from me. Yeah.
Well, and I would go out there, and and he was surprised. His name was Bob Reiner. He would say that nobody from Silicon Valley comes to visit us. So finally, on one of those meetings, he said, "Okay, I'll sign up. You got to go to that office. They are the office that negotiate." I'm like, "Oh shoot, they got negotiators." So I got to really,
You were negotiating with smugglers though, so like
exactly.
I have my money on you. So
well, yeah, Persians do negotiation as a sport. So I went there and I'm thinking, I want $5 a lead. I'm going to say 15, so he'll negotiate me down to 5. I said 15, and the guy said, "Is there any room?" I'm like, "No." He said, "Okay." I'm like, "Oh shoot." I'm like, on one hand, I'm excited. On the other hand, I feel a little bit like, I charge too much. I said, "Okay, there's a way that I can give you a significant discount. And that is if you pay me a year's worth of leads cash up front." He said, "How much?" I said, $2 million. He said, "Okay." So they gave me $2 million, which was, again, a game changer for us because it meant that we did not have to go out there and raise more money and get more diluted.
So at this point, you're monetizing the leads in addition to the dealerships with other companies, which is really smart. That's great. And at what point are you considering going public?
Well, along the way, State Farm became interested in acquiring the business, which we decided not to sell because we thought we'll get a much higher valuation going public. And so I would say that about October of 1998, we decided that an IPO would make sense. So we worked on that process, hired Credit Suisse First Boston as our primary banker, and we started that process. And we filed in January of 1999. And a couple of weeks prior to that, we brought on board a new CEO, which I was on board with the idea of hiring a CEO, but despite the fact that this guy was a good guy, I thought he was not the right guy for this job. We brought him on board. We took the company public, which turned out to be a great IPO, but the company had struggled, partly because we did not have the right leadership. And the board, made up of VCs, was having a really hard time taking decisive action.
At that point, I think you've talked about this. They wanted someone gray-haired in the room, and they took you out of leadership.
Yep.
Right. And so I think at the time you're still advising them, but you're no longer really working inside the company.
That's correct. I mean, I had an executive vice president title, but you can imagine you cannot demote a founder to from a CEO to something like that, report to a guy who has no passion, no vision for changing the automotive industry, and then expect me to report to the guy. That's just not going to happen. But I was trying to make it work, but the fact that he wasn't showing any passion made it very difficult. And There was a time that he asked me to leave. I did, which was like 2 weeks after he joined. I left, and we have already filed for an IPO, and we're in the middle of that whole process. And of course, me being gone caused the revenue of the company going the wrong direction. So he asked me to go back, and I happily went back and helped out, make sure the company is back on track. But this whole process opened my eyes to how I say I shouldn't say all VCs, but most VCs work. Most VCs, they are not paid to create companies. They're paid to maximize the IRR of their fund. And the maximization of IRR can be very different than being in the business of building companies that can become significant success stories 20 years down the road, which is what typically founders want. So I realized that these guys just wanted to keep the stock price high long enough so they could sell. And it was tough. It was tough to see the company being managed in that manner.
Yeah, there's I loved your conversation with John Warlow, and I encourage people if they want to hear kind of the ins and outs. We won't get into it now of like
Sure.
the State Farm and how that deal almost went through but didn't, and then the transition to kind of how it all worked, when you were trying to help and, maybe they just didn't want your help, and some of the nuances behind why it's sometimes hard when you're a public company because, you create waves, even if it's going to be good on the long term, it could be really bad on the short term as far as stock price.
Yeah.
So you're stuck in a little bit of a hard spot, or the leadership team is. But ultimately, then so you go public. At what point does your brother step away?
Yeah. My brother. So one thing I got to mention there is that part of the problem with the whole system is that as a founder, you're taking a company public for the first time, typically. But the bankers, the VCs, they've experienced that process before. And so you're excited when your stock price was supposed to go out at 10, you go out at 14, opens at 27, closed at 50. Like, oh my God, this is amazing. But the company should have been worth 10, not 50. So now all of a sudden you're in trouble because you're going to have a tough road ahead until you, in a sense, get the value to a level that the company should be worth $50 a share. The VCs at that point, all they care about is that keep it at 50. Do what you have to do, keep it at 50 so I can sell 6 months after the IPO. But you're like, I can't do that. The company did only 13 million in revenue last year. It should not have been worth $1 billion too. It should have been worth a couple $100 million, which was supposed to be the price at IPO. But the problem is that the stock was manipulated by the bankers to accomplish a bunch of their goals, which are at odds with mine and the VCs. It's a mess. It's a mess of a process, at least. And of course, it's unethical, but it's not illegal. And when you hear that the system is rigged, it is rigged. It is very much rigged.
And it's a kind of a spiral because like it's almost impossible to maintain it. And so if it goes down, that just creates a signal, and then it goes down and down. You know what I mean? It just creates a cycle. It affects
your employees, it affects everything. I mean, nobody wants to have a company that the stock price goes down by a lot is not a company that's looked at favorably by even clients, employees, anything. So it puts you in the penalty box in a major way. It's a downward spiral. But then again, bankers don't care about that. And typically VCs don't care as much about it either. Now, so my brother left. There was a day that the VCs were basically, they're paralyzed. We know we have a CEO that cannot do the job, but they're not willing to make that decision. And they're making decisions that appear unethical, not illegal. And my brother says, I'm out of here. I cannot be a part of this. So he wrote his resignation on a napkin, handed it over to our outside counsel from Fenwick and West, and walked out. Never came back. And I tried to be a positive influence for a couple of months, did not work out. So I left too. And that was the end of it. And I sold all my shares, as did my brother. And I think as of 2000, I did not have a single share in the company.
Now, fast forward, you reacquire AutoWeb. I'll just share my
Yeah.
screen. We'll poke around.
Yeah.
You know, we have One Planet here. Obviously, you know, through your experience, you
Yeah.
think of leadership in companies in a different way, right,
Yeah.
than what you experienced with the IPO. But talk about reacquiring AutoWeb.
So in 2022, so a year and a half ago, AutoWeb, basically was still a publicly traded company, but got to a point that it did not really have a path forward. They were out of cash and were losing money, and they had a shrinking revenue. They had to basically let the public know, announce that they had a going concern issue, meaning that they would run out of cash. Um, they had accumulated $350 million in losses since I had left. And so at that point, I made an offer to buy the company. That turned out to be the highest offer they could come up with. So I bought the company and closed the deal on September 1, 2022. And I got to keep in mind, not a single employee from my days were left. This was a very different company. And many of the basics were still there. But it was a company that was in a very challenging situation, losing a ton of money. But here's the interesting part. September 1, 2022, we bought the company. The next month, October of 2022, the company became profitable. And it's been profitable since then. I'm always reminded of Gordon Bethune, who was the CEO of Continental Airlines. And they asked him, what did it take to make Continental profitable? He said it wasn't that difficult. We had routes that we lost money on. We had routes that we made money on. We stopped going to cities that we lost money on and we became profitable. The problem with many public companies is that they get hooked on revenue, not hooked on profits. And they keep, chasing that revenue at any cost because they have heard the whole thing that you got to keep growing. But growth at any cost, growth while leaving a carnage behind, I simply don't sign up for that. So I like to run and build profitable companies. And by the way, when we took AutoWeb public in 1999, second to eBay, it was the only other profitable company on the internet.
Talk about some of the brands. I don't know if you consider them brands underneath AutoWeb here. And you're looking, if you're watching the video or if you're listening to the audio, there is a video piece, and we're here on One Planet Group, but you can see it's AutoWeb here, and there's some other services and kind of brands underneath there.
So AutoWeb ended up acquiring almost all small players that were in competition with him. So he owns a lot of brands. Car.com is one of the brands. Usedcars.com, AutoBytel, which was a major brand by itself, went public, and smaller brands like CarSmart, AutoSite. So there are many, many brands.
The car.com and usedcar.com, cars.com is also under the AutoWeb.
That's right.
Yeah. Those are amazing domains, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, so today our automotive business accounts for about 1 million new cars sold in the US every year. So about 1 out of 15 of every new car that you see on the street was sold through this platform. And then, usedcars.com is it's a newer service, it's growing, but it has about 1 million used car listings on it. And with
COVID, it must have been going crazy.
Well, I mean, I did not own the company at that point. The company had so many other problems at the time that I don't think it was really able to take advantage of the opportunities that it had. But now being a profitable company, being a stable business, we're definitely seeing growth. Usedcars.com, since we acquired the business, has tripled in size. And I think that, when you think about AutoTrader.com being $1 billion business in the same space, usedcars.com, I do think has a bright future.
And then it's not just AutoWeb. Talk about some of the other companies, you could see here, BuyerLink and some other companies that are in other companies you've invested in too.
Yeah. I mean, BuyerLink is a company, another company we own. that is in the performance-based marketing space. It provides solutions for companies in the real estate vertical and home services, even in the automotive industry. And it basically, think about anyone that wants to gain access to online consumer demand, but in a locally targeted manner. And BuyerLink provides that. It's a large company. It's a bigger company than AutoWeb. And it's been around for a long time also. It's got a patented auction marketplace that enables the services that it offers. We own California.com, which I jokingly say is my love letter to California. California was where I got started in the US, and it's been good to me. And California.com is meant to shine the light on the best that California has to offer. We own Westwind Pictures, which is basically a production company. We make movies, we make TV shows, documentaries, but basically the kinds of content that I like to say brings light to the world.
Talk about One Planet Group, and kind of how you think about companies, and not just that you start, but that you invest in as well. Yeah.
So One Planet Group is basically, I would say, my playground. I don't have any outside investors, so I get to decide how it operates. And I decided to create One Planet Group when I really wanted to combine my spiritual values with my business life. I thought the idea of a business is just a business was way, way too archaic. Business is not just business. Business touches humans. Business touches the most noble creation on the planet. It's not just business. And and just the idea that why nonprofits stand for betterment of the world and for-profits for greed did not make any sense to me. So I wanted to combine my professional endeavors with living a life of service. And that's how One Planet Group came about. But I often say that it puts a pretty picture on my chaotic world, because I get to really, wrap the stuff that I'm involved in, whether it is the investments that we make, which we do about a few investments a year. We've invested in over 50 companies. And the companies we invest in, they are some of the best business ideas out there. But we only invest in entrepreneurs that sign up for our concept of innovation plus intention, which is basically that you consider the ripple effect of your decisions, whether it is where you invest money, what kind of products are you going to offer. I mean, to give you an example, if you are Snapchat and you're going to make it possible for your users to rate their friends, is that good? Is that good for the world? Is that good for your users? So we want our entrepreneurs to consider those things. So any company we invest in, they get to sign up for what we call, it's a document that's called For the Betterment of the World. That says, for the love I have for humanity, there are a bunch of things I'm going to consider and do different than they've been done.
I want to be the first one to thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey, your stories. It's really incredible on so many levels. I want to encourage people to go to, you can check out the book probably on Amazon or any other sites, but crossingthedesertbook.com to learn more and the power of embracing life's difficult journeys. Depending when you listen to this, you may have some upcoming book signings near you, so you can check out the website. But at least if you find any of this a little bit intriguing, not just a lot intriguing, check out the book on Audible or Amazon or any other places online. And Payam, thanks so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.